what we've seen in the streets of the United Kingdom in the last couple of weeks are violent riots, riots that have been instigated and driven and participated by the far right. These riots, this violence, has not taken place in a vacuum. It's been years, if not decades, of anti-migrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric, xenophobic rhetoric that has been mainstreamed into, I'm afraid, British media discourse as well as British political discourse. And then couple that with the spreading of disinformation on social media and particularly on platforms like X, in fact, by the owner of X, Elon Musk, then that, of course, lights the spark, lights the fuse that results in violent disorder, mosques being attacked, Black and Asian people being targeted, and the most vile Islamophobia ever being heard on our streets. So this didn't happen in a vacuum. And I'm afraid until we address the root causes of it, I'm very afraid that this will simply happen again and again and again. The language of the far right has been normalized in our media discourse, I'm afraid, in the United Kingdom, as well as our political discourse. We have had politician after politician use the rhetoric of the far right and adopt it into the mainstream language. Let's just look at a few examples. We have in the British Parliament sitting a former Home Secretary who wrote an article in one of the best-selling broadsheet newspapers in the United Kingdom saying that in the UK, the Islamists are taking over. That effectively is a dog whistle against the Muslim community. We have Nigel Farage, just elected as an MP in a world full of Islamophobes. He's one of the cheerleaders, somebody who has called Muslims a fifth column who are trying to kill us. He said that migrants are trying to take us over. He started his election campaign by saying many Muslims don't share British values. If there is a dog whistle to be blown, then Nigel Farage is often at the very front of the queue. Lee Anderson, an MP just elected, again, or re-elected in the general election, said that the Muslim mayor of London was controlled by Islamists. So let's not pretend that the language of the far right belongs to the extremes or the fringes. The language of the far right has been normalized, has been mainstreamed, and has been adopted by politicians for years, and that's why we're seeing such violent disorder now on our streets. This violence, this is disorder, some people inaccurately describe it as a working class problem. I reject that entirely. Let me give you just two examples of why I reject it. First and foremost, whenever I faced Islamophobia or racism, the people who stand alongside me in opposition to that hatred are a trade union movement from across the country. And if you want the true representative of the working class, then it's the trade union movement who've got a long history of opposing hatred, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and racism in all of its forms. But secondly, the instigators, the hate preachers, are not the working class. They're people like Nigel Farage. They're people like Elon Musk. They're people like Suella Braverman, like Lee Anderson, MPs, people from the top of the political class. And then there's the editors of some of the right-wing press in the United Kingdom that for years, nay, for decades, have indulged in anti-migrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Editors of the likes of the Daily Mail, Daily Express, the Daily Telegraph, newspapers that have often fanned the flames of racial tension. And these are not working class people. These are people who are multimillionaires, if not some of them owners of these papers, multi-billionaires. I'll be honest that I have seen a lot from Keir Starmer, which I think is commendable. I think he was right to call it out as far-right thuggery. He didn't mince his words, I thought, in that respect. My advice to Keir Starmer would be, look, ensure that these protesters, as they call themselves, but they're rioters, violent rioters, end up feeling the full force of the law, and we're starting to see those sentences being handed out. But let's also take this opportunity to reset the narrative around multiculturalism and around migration. You've now got an opportunity, the Prime Minister has an opportunity to do that, because for far too long, as we've been discussing, that anti-migrant rhetoric, that anti-Muslim rhetoric has become normalized in our political discourse. Well, why not have a Prime Minister stand up and say, you know what? Yes, for any challenges and problems that come with migration or even multiculturalism, yes, let's talk about those. But you know what we should start the conversation with? What the premise of the conversation should be? It should be that multiculturalism and migration have been good I would suggest essential actually for the UK, and actually is essential for our future growth and the future of having a cohesive society in the United Kingdom. That would be, in my eyes, at least beginning to address the root causes. And if we don't address those root causes, this violence will just happen again and again. I never thought I would live to see the day in the UK where mosques would have bricks being thrown at them. And that makes me, and I have to say, every single Muslim I've spoken to in the United Kingdom question whether or not they can be safe in a country that they call home. I don't have any other home than Scotland. Born here, raised here, lived here my whole life, was the First Minister of the Scottish Government for a period too. I'm as Scottish as they possibly come. But I have to think about my family's future. First and foremost, I'm a father and a husband. And can I say truthfully that my daughters will be safe in the UK in the future? Will they be targeted for their appearance? Will they be targeted if they choose to go to a mosque? I can't guarantee their safety. So every single Muslim, myself included, is asking themselves, can we be safe in the future in the United Kingdom? And I don't know the answer to that. Is first and foremost, Elon Musk is not accountable to anybody other than his shareholders. He's not accountable through the democratic process or through elections, yet he uses his billions and he uses his wealth to try to align with the far right, to instigate, to help to instigate the terrible violence and disorder that we saw in the streets of the United Kingdom. And Elon Musk is not an idiot. He knows what he is doing. He would not have made his billions if he was an idiot. So he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows the consequences of what he's doing, and he will continue to do it because, as I say, he is simply not accountable to anyone. And in my mind, that's what makes Elon Musk one of the most dangerous men on the planet. And it's why Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has to ensure that social media platforms, not just X, but X included, have to be far better regulated. Otherwise, every time there is an incident, misinformation and disinformation helped propagated by the owner of X will spread like wildfire. But the BBC calling these violent rioters protesters and talking about protesters versus counter protesters. But these people weren't protesters, they were violent rioters. They were quite literally trying to set a hotel on fire that had vulnerable people inside, that had human beings inside. They were trying to set it ablaze. Can you imagine what the consequences of that would have been if they had been successful? So these were not protesters. They did not have quote unquote legitimate concerns. They were not expressing those legitimate concerns. If you have legitimate concerns, there are, of course, legitimate ways to express those through the democratic and peaceful protests. So some of the media narrative in the beginning of these riots was thoroughly depressing. Let's just for a minute imagine that the alleged Southport killer had been a Muslim. Now, he wasn't, but imagine he had been. Would that have been a justification for attacking mosques? Would that have been a justification for targeting Muslims? Of course not. That would be collective punishment. So we've got to reset the entire narrative, and that's the job of politicians, and it's the job of the media to behave in a far more responsible manner.